not all letters were written to pagan audiences in the Roman Empire. Some of them were written to a Jewish audience. So we call them the Jewish books, and let's look at those. So here we go. Here's our PowerPoint. Jewish New Testament books. So as such, we identify the letter to the Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, the letter of Jude, and the book of Revelation. So a Jewish presence in the New Testament. First of all, of course, Jesus was a Jew. He was raised as a Jewish boy and then as a Jewish man. And Jesus' original disciples, his students, were Jews. Luke, who wrote the Gospel of Luke and then the book of Acts, was likely the only non-Jew, but he was not part of his original disciples. And most, if not all, of the people who became Jesus followers on the day of Pentecost were Jews. They were in town because they had been there for Passover and then stayed and were there to celebrate the Feast of Harvest. And so Christians always have seen themselves as part of the overall story of God, the Jewish story. And we look at that part of the story, right? So let's look at a couple of these books. First of all, the letter to the Hebrews. It's a difficult letter to read. It's beautiful, but it's difficult. Remember, it's an anonymous letter in the sense that the author is not named. We don't know exactly when it was written. We do get this idea that it was written to a specific group of Christians, and it has these Jewish overtones. So probably a Christian group with a Jewish majority in or around Rome. And most people believe that this is actually a sermon that's sent in a letter. And I like that. And Hebrews 13:22 talks about that. So let's take a look at that.
So it says in Hebrews 13:22, I appeal to y'all, brothers and sisters, bear with my word of exhortation, for I have written to y'all briefly. So this idea of exhorting is this idea of preaching a sermon, and then I've written to you briefly to accompany a sermon. That's interesting, right? And the theme would be perseverance, to hang in there amidst the Christian life in the Roman Empire. So the key verse here for the letter to the Romans is way at the beginning, where it says, long ago, God spoke to our ancestors. This is kind of like the way of talking to Jewish people in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, who he appointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the worlds. And they believed in like the physical world and the heavenly worlds. So that's it. And then for the rest, the next part of it, the author talks about Jesus. Who is Jesus? And, Jesus is greater than even the angels. And Jewish people had a great appreciation for angels. They believed that angels were even present when the Hebrew law was given. They said, Jesus is even greater than Moses. And did they ever deeply appreciate Moses? And greater than the high priest, these ritualistic sort of people. And so you can see these Jewish overtones there. And when we come to the end of the letter to the Hebrews, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, these people who've gone before us, it says, therefore, we can keep hanging in there. They have done it, so we can do it. And it said, so now we look at Jesus, the forerunner, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who was crucified, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shameful way of dying, and has taken his seat at the right hand of the throne of God. This is this idea of authority. And then by way of encouraging people, which would come at the end of a sermon, it says, here's some things that you should do. Stay away from loving money. Be content. Remember that God is always with you. Remember your leaders. And then it has like this reminder that Jesus never changes, very much so like a sermon. And then the ultimate challenge, following Christ outside the camp. 13:13. Let us then go to him outside the camp and bear the abuse he endured. And just the fact that he talks about outside the camp, and right before that he says, therefore Jesus also suffered outside the city gate. It's very specific about the location where Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem. That all has very strong Jewish overtones. And as such, people are invited to follow Jesus. Letter of James is also very much so Jewish in its tone. We're not quite sure when it's written. It kind of depends on who James is. If James is a brother of Jesus or a different kind of James. And that means it's either written in the 60s or maybe even earlier. It has a very cryptic designation, right? 12 tribes, the diaspora, the Jews living outside the land of Israel. But the themes are wisdom and true faith. And this idea of a wisdom theme very much resonates this idea of wisdom in the Old Testament. It has a lot of just like moral statements, 59 modes of commands, imperatives, in only like 108 verses. So it looks like it's kind of like the wisdom tradition that we know from the old books of the law, the first 5 books of the Torah. So you could say that this is kind of the wisdom literature of the New Testament. And when we look at the theme verses here, it seems to appear right up front in chapter 1, where it says, if any of y'all, is the plural, if any of y'all is lacking in wisdom, he must ask God, who gives to all generously and ungrudgingly, and it will be given to y'all. And notice these red words there, these Greek words, if any of you is lacking. And the sense that these Greek verbs give is ongoing. It says, if any of you is constantly lacking in wisdom, if you have a lifestyle that is just devoid of wisdom, and then it's like one of those imperatives. He must ask God. That's just what you got to do. And God is not just any kind of God. He's the kind of God who constantly gives. It's a lifestyle. It's a giving kind of God. And then it continues and it says, but here it is. You should ask in faith, never doubting. For the one who doubts is just kind of you bee-bobbing on the waves of the sea. Well, that's kind of hard. I mean, how do you not doubt? Can you just push a button and you never doubt? And how does that work? So if you doubt, then faith doesn't work. Is faith like a formula? It's formulaic, and certainly it's not. And so the key here is in the language. It's not theological, it's in the language. So the red words here indicate what kind of language this is. And so we teach Greek. I teach Greek, and a colleague of mine as well at the University of Mary Hardin-Baylor, and understanding the language will really help you. So the Greek here is this ongoing sense. It says, ask in faith, not having a lifestyle of doubting. Do we doubt sometimes? Yes, we do. But if you have a lifestyle of doubting, why even kind of like do like a trial and go like, yeah, I might as well just try some faith. No, not having a lifestyle. For the one who has a lifestyle of doubting, well, that means that you're bee-bobbing on the ocean. But if you have a lifestyle of wanting to seek God, then even though sometimes we doubt, this is what God welcomes. So seeking wisdom. James also defines true religion, because Jewish people have the sense of religion. He says, now here's true religion. The Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible talks about it. It's pure and clean before God the Father, because it's this idea that we take care of the defenseless. We take care of the orphans and the widows when they are stressed out, trying to live in this world. And we keep ourselves unstained by people who do not follow God's ideals. And so it actually says that faith by itself, if you're just sitting there being all religious, but you don't do anything about it, that is not the way it works. It's dead. It should be accompanied by good deeds. And that's the way faith is supposed to work.